Matilda is a 13-year-old girl who goes to Bully Street High School. Like most girls her age, Matilda uses Facebook to catch up with friends and talk after school and on weekends. Sometimes, two girls from Matilda's school, Hate and Envy, would get online and write mean things about Matilda that weren't true. This made Matilda hurt, and she felt she could not escape the wrath of these monsters both at school and at home. Matilda would write about her frustration in her diary, and one day decided she had had enough. She wanted to go somewhere where she could escape and where no one could hurt her anymore. They would be sorry when she was dead. Her despair drew her to a dark place, and in her moment of distress came a saving message from another girl she went to school with, Compassion. Compassion told her that hate and envy bullied many girls, including her, and she found a way of dealing with it by talking to the school counsellor. Compassion, just through being supportive, saved a life that night. Hate and envy could be beaten by support and kindness. The next day, Matilda went to the counsellor. She was hesitant and did not want to talk about what had been happening. The counsellor didn't mind and explained that it is sometimes easier to draw what you are feeling, and introduced Matilda to the concept of a shield. The shield is a form of alternative art therapy that helps a child to recognise their strengths and develop coping strategies. It also encourages children to focus on the future and to create a support network to help them cope. A shield enabled Matilda to get through those days. It gave her things to look forward to and see the big picture, even when bullies were affecting her. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, school-aged children are using social media more and more each year. In 2010, up to 10% of students in grades 4 to 9 had reported being victims of cyberbullying. Students are reluctant to report bullying, and some report the figure is closer to 25%. In the United States of America, the figure is about 50%. The problem is much greater as children reach their early teen years. Cyberbullying occurs worldwide. As technology grows, so does cyberbullying. It involves harassing, humiliating, and threatening others through text messages, email, and social media, with Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and other popular sites being key areas for bullies. Children's interactions with their peers forms an important part of their development. When aggression and violence takes place in peer interaction, this can have a negative effect on a child's development. Being bullied online can create a cycle, as research shows that 50% of people who engage in cyberbullying have been victims of such bullying themselves. Cyberbullying doesn't just have a negative effect on the victim of bullying, but also on the bullies themselves. Thus, cyberbullying is a social problem and needs to be addressed in a social context. Cyberbullying has serious psychological effects on young people. These are similar to those experienced in physical bullying and include depression, low self-esteem, poor mental health, poor academic performance, and the deterioration of relationships. However, these negative effects can be more severe in cyberbullying, as the bullying can reach a wider audience and can be more invasive, as it can affect the victim at home as well as at school. The effects of cyberbullying have been highlighted in the media recently, which has brought attention to cyberbullying as a human rights issue in Australia and internationally. A child that is a victim of cyberbullying experiences degrading and cruel treatment from their peers, which impacts their social, emotional, and often physical health. Cyberbullying, therefore, leads to a violation of a number of fundamental human rights. A child rights-based approach identifies and evaluates children's needs by reference to their rights under international legal instruments, including the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, commonly referred to as CROC. By taking a child rights-based approach to the human rights issue of cyberbullying amongst young people, it becomes clear that young people who experience cyberbullying experience a breach of a number of international human rights, including the right to be protected from abuse and violence, whether mental, emotional, or physical, the right to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, the right to freedom of expression and information if it is within legal boundaries, the right to leisure and play. All of these human rights and more are breached when a young person suffers at the hands of a cyberbully. Article 19 requires the state to take all appropriate legislative measures to protect a child from physical and mental harm. The question remains, what measures can be taken to prevent the breaches of human rights cyberbullying presents. In the last few years, there has been an increase in the number of students taking civil action and seeking compensation for cyberbullying. Action is frequently taken against the school for failing to prevent the harm occurring. Civil action is a good way to seek justice, but might not be for everyone. Some victims might not have the means or even strength to seek remedies in court. There is also a problem with determining liability, and this reactive means of redress does little to prevent bullying from occurring in the first place. Some countries have explored the possibility of criminalising cyberbullying. In Australia, Victoria became the first state to move towards criminalisation in 2010, when changes to their Crimes Act meant that repetitive bullying could be classified as stalking and give rise to imprisonment for up to 10 years. Unfortunately, this came after the high-profile suicide of Victorian teenager Brodie Penlock. In New Zealand, the approach has been to move towards creating a specific cyberbullying offence which could apply to anyone over 14. Criminalisation would be highly successful in order to obtain justice for victims of bullying and to punish bullies directly. However, the issue is complex. Many bullies are very young and may not fully understand what they're doing is wrong. It is difficult to hold these people criminally responsible for their actions. Additionally, cyberbullying has never been defined by the law and would need to be precise in order for people to be punished for it. Incidents of cyberbullying are often large-scale and may be hard to detect and track. Since it mostly occurs through technology, there may be evidentiary issues. The key issue is that if Australia were to criminalise cyberbullying, there would have to be a focus on education and awareness, so that children definitely knew that cyberbullying was a crime. With any proposed legislative reform in this area, the legislature should have regard to the general and specific principles of a child rights-based approach. All rights are capable of being realised simultaneously, and it's not enough for a policy or law to protect one right if it neglects other related rights. Cyberbullying legislation must therefore give equal status to all human rights. States are obliged to respect and protect the rights contained in human rights instruments and are accountable for taking preventative legislative actions rather than simply reacting when there has been a human rights infringement. The Australian government should be held accountable for the human rights breaches associated with cyberbullying and must proactively implement preventative measures, such as legislation criminalising cyberbullying. All children have the same rights, so ideally the proposed legislation should be Commonwealth legislation with nationwide effect. However, each state and territory has jurisdiction to implement laws criminalising certain activities. The government should therefore urge each state and territory to enact commensurate provisions. Any proposed legislation or other measures must not nullify or otherwise hinder any child human rights by reason of excluding or restricting the operation of certain rights. All rights should be given equal status and should be preserved by the legislature accordingly. By collaborating with professionals from the legal and social work disciplines, a child impact assessment and evaluation must be conducted before any legislation or policy affecting children's rights is implemented. It is important that children have a say in actions that will affect them, so children's views should be taken into account when drafting any proposed legislation to combat the issue of cyberbullying. The child rights-based approach has been somewhat formalised by the federal government's creation of a Parliamentary Joint Committee on Human Rights, which will scrutinise all new bills and acts against the standards in the 7 international human treaties, including the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. This means that children's rights must now be considered in the process of lawmaking. On a grassroots level, schools should take steps to implement programs informing students about the dangers of social media and the risks of cyberbullying. If children were made aware of the harm caused by bullying at a younger age, perhaps the problem would not be so big in later life. This can make children less likely to engage in cyberbullying and more likely to intervene in cyberbullying when it takes place. Schools can also help by implementing peer support programs, creating a supportive and interactive class environment, and teaching netiquette, Parents and teachers should be aware that banning internet access often doesn't help, as this will just make the child afraid of reporting cyberbullying because they will get in trouble for accessing the internet. Schools and families should also encourage children to report bullying when it happens. Many social media sites have a reporting feature, which makes this relatively easy. This can be done by parents and teachers, encouraging empathy in children. These are just some of the suggestions for tackling this human rights issue. It's a complex, developing area of law, and checks and balances should be in place to ensure any legal implementations adequately address the issue.